certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Kira Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
It's been revealed up to 17,000 people had their DNA tested as part of the Claremont serial killings investigation. Hello, on day 43 of the trial, Natalie Bonjolo, Tim Clark and Alison Fan joining you today. And really, this is the very first time that we've heard this number, which is absolutely staggering.
And that's just for this particular investigation. And of course, they're all on documents that have not been handed over, and we get to hear them maybe tomorrow. We just don't know. At this stage, there's a lot to go through for both. It's caused headaches for both the prosecution and the defence team, this delay. And the judge today sort of prompting and getting a bit more anxious and said he wants assurances that there are not other missing documents lurking out there that could cause even further delays. But yes, the taxi drivers and everybody else that gave their DNA, because it was a long-running investigation.
So, Tim, how did it come about that you got this information today on what was a very, very short day in court?
Yeah, it was short, but it was action-packed as usual. Matt, even with 10 or so minutes we were sat there, we still found out something that has been under wraps for more than 15 years, and this was basically the prosecution going back and having a look at these 400 new documents that they revealed that had been emerged over the weekend. But then, on top of that, they've now said, well, yes, and we have these documents that relate to these, as you say, 17,000 people who gave over their DNA samples in the absolute sort of maelstrom of what was the Macro investigation. When police went on a blitz around Perth, and we were desperate to get any clues, and that now we know included nearly 20,000 people giving their DNA over and having it tested.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary number. And was this because the judge had asked, is there anything else that you should be telling us?
Well, yes. I mean, he wanted to know, obviously, but are we going to be ambushed like this again? Are we going to get any more unhappy surprises? And Ms. Barbagallo assured him that she said there were no other documents lurking away, which is Justice Hall's words, not mine. But then she did say, well, but actually we have found this, and it might well become part of the evidence. There are more than going to be 60 new exhibits that are going to have to be put forward now by the prosecution as part of this new tranche of evidence, a 35-page statement which was being compiled by Alex Bagdonovicius, which has to be the longest statement ever compiled while a witness is actually giving evidence in court. They gave him the extra day today because he needed to read over it and make sure it was all right today. So, as we said, it's extremely unfortunate, unsatisfactory to have to do this all on the run, but that's exactly what they've done over the last couple of days, and hopefully, touch wood, we'll get back on tomorrow and get back the trial back on the rails, as they say.
That's right. And Ali, I mean, we always knew that thousands of taxi drivers had given their DNA samples, and you'll recall, as I recall, those pictures that we would see on the TV news of taxis lined up as far as the eye could see, and people having a swab taken of their inside cheek and having their fingerprints taken. So we knew there was thousands, but to realise that this many people had handed over their DNA in this period of time really does show how bigger and broader that scope was by the Macro Task Force.
A lot of fear generated because everybody was asking who would these girls get into a car without thinking, and of course the taxi industry was the immediate one. It generated fear with everybody that you do not get into a taxi because that's the only car that you get into without thinking, without any suspicions at all. And the entire taxi industry was under suspicion, and it was really a bad time for them.
Yeah. We have a small clip here from one of the TV news broadcasts from yourself, Alison, back then.
Taxi drivers faced accusations, lining up in their thousands to provide their DNA and fingerprints.
It was like a taxi rank at Warwick Police Station this morning, only the cabs were going nowhere except to help police in their hunt for a serial killer. So police still have no prime suspect, and it will be some 2 weeks before the results of these tests are known. Then, if there is no breakthrough, the Macro Task Force will consider testing other groups, like Claremont's security guards and bar and restaurant workers.
So I guess listening to that, Tim, what we know now, of course, after this information that was revealed in court today, is that they obviously did go on to test so many more people.
Yeah, you would not envy the person that was having to do all those tests, because we've heard, I mean, it's not just a case of taking a swab, you know, putting it in a special machine and getting a red or green light. It's a lot more complicated than that. And so imagine the poor Path West workers having to process all these swabs taken, tabulate them, keep records of them, and then the police asking for the results probably as quickly as you could humanly get them. And I mean, the question it also raises for me is, with all these DNA samples, what were they comparing it to? I mean, because you've got to have a sample. What were they actually testing it against?
I remember there were concerns at the time, Tim, from lawyers saying that if they got nothing to compare it to, these taxi drivers could have a case against everybody. But what are they comparing it to?
Yeah, well, and once again, it goes back to discussions we've had previously, Ali. We know that they had the Karrakatta rape sample in the Path West lab, and we know from John Townsend on yesterday's podcast telling us that the detectives, as far as he was concerned, had made the link between that the Claremont, the Karrakatta rape and the disappearance of Sarah Spears, basically as soon as she went missing. So if they were comparing it against those DNA samples, well, good on them. They obviously didn't get a result because it was only many years later. But it also, again, does raise the question about Lance Williams.
That's
because
right.
They also had his DNA. So if they were comparing this DNA to the Karrakatta sample and to Lance, they shouldn't have been getting a result. And so it just raises a whole another set of questions about the investigation over many, many years. We all knew that the police were trying everything they could, and this number, this 17,000 number that we got today, absolutely proves that. But once again, it does raise the question as whether they might have been working hard, but were they necessarily working as smart as they could?
Yeah, and if they were comparing the samples to the Karrakatta rape victim, then obviously they were not excluding Lance Williams. So does that mean then that they were thinking to themselves, okay, well, we now don't think that these cases are connected?
Well, yeah, it's just I don't know. Maybe there's more to come that will explain this timeline. I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, the fact that they had this they were doing this bulk of work, this body of work. It also backs up exactly what Ms. Barbagallo said many moons ago now, that there was millions of documents in this brief, and you know, these 16,000 DNA, 17,000 DNA test results. I mean, you can imagine how many lever arch folders they took up.
And of course, it wasn't just Lance Williams who was, you know, scooped up in this net. All sorts of people had faced accusations and rumours and what have you, and so many people felt like they were having to defend themselves.
Well, everybody in Claremont was looking sideways at the bar people, the Glassies, the young kids around there. The Claremont mayor, of course.
Even the mayor, Peter Wagers, at one point was having to publicly defend himself and say this is absolutely outrageous.
And because
there were police hanging off his roof, I think.
Yeah.
We've got pictures in our archives of a police officer literally with his hand inside the roof space of Mr. Wagers' home in Claremont. And as John said yesterday, Claremont's the Golden Triangle. If that didn't get some curtains twitching, I wouldn't know what would.
That's right. Well, we do actually have a clip from that time.
To be falsely and maliciously accused of such totally bizarre, obscene and vicious allegations of committing murders you know nothing about.
And of course, it's all too late for Lance Williams. I mean, he's gone. Peter Wagers has been yelling all along.
That's
about
right, and that's
the
Peter
treatment he's got.
Wagers.
That was Peter Wagers, the Claremont mayor. And other people too, right through Claremont, they're looking. Everybody was so fearful and paranoid that the restaurateurs, anybody that had anything to do with Claremont was immediately under suspicion.
People have rung up and said, the fellow lives next door is a real strange sort of a person.
Now, of course, these delays are messing up a lot more than just the hearings of the day. Next week, the witnesses, Tim, they've all been having to be rescheduled.
Yeah, well, this is what we talked about, the ripple effect of these things. It's not just the immediate delay, the cost of it, the inconvenience of it, but because it's such a many-headed beast, this trial, and so many different moving parts. There were witnesses that had been due to give evidence, we understand, from the UK, video links coming in from various parts of the city and the state. And because now we're going to lose 3 days at least of hearing time, that knocks everything back. Mr. Bogdanovicius will probably be at least another couple of hours with his evidence in chief tomorrow, and then the cross-examination, which will take as long as it takes. So yeah, it's just one of those domino things that when one falls over, there is knock-on effects. So there'll be a lot of reshuffling as well as reading and re-signing of statements and all sorts going on in the background today before we all, well, not all of us put our gowns back on, but the lawyers put their gowns back on tomorrow and get back into it.
And delays, of course, cost an enormous amount of money. Alison, this is a very expensive trial.
Well, all the trials are expensive, particularly this one, running into the millions. But I think lawyers have put a cost of at least $50,000 a day. But even as the judge was talking about it today, even if we do have to sit at a certain time next week to accommodate the UK, they've got to get extra security. They've got to open courts when they're not meant to be open at night time. It's all the peripheral staff and security and video links and other members of the whole court community that become involved.
Yeah. I mean, if you do the maths, just think about that. $50,000 a day, you're looking at around $1 million a month. So for every month that this trial runs, you're extending into potentially tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's pretty much what the state government has budgeted for on both sides, because listeners might not be aware or not, but Mr. Edwards' defence is being paid for by legal aid, which is also public money, because no one, well, apart from a handful of billionaires maybe in Australia, will be able to afford the kind of defence that is needed when you're facing such serious allegations. You've got 5 very senior lawyers just sat at the front. You've got the judge, you've got all the police and everyone else, the staff helping. You can quite easily see where that money is going, but it hasn't been going anywhere fast the last 3 days, unfortunately.
And in terms of the cost for Bradley Edwards' defence, that's paid for by legal aid, which is paid for by the taxpayer, correct?
Which people don't understand, but without a defence there's no trial.
That's right.
So that just has to happen. And usually if there's a senior counsel QC on one side, there has to be a matching one on the other side. So that's just the cost that is necessary for a trial to take place.
Yes.
Yeah. And even with if you're forced to, I mean, the logic is if you're forced to pay for it yourself and you won't be able to afford to pay the best, then you might get bad defence, which could lead to
an appeal.
God forbid, a mistrial or an appeal, and that's not what anyone wants. Certainly not a mistrial. So I know it upsets a lot of people in the community to think that someone who's facing these allegations does get his defence paid for, but as he sits today, he's an innocent man, and he's entitled to the best defence he can get.
And that would be something that any person in any situation would also be entitled to.
Absolutely.
I'm curious about the 17,000 people that had their DNA tested as part of this investigation. The names of those people, is it likely that they would be tendered as public documents, that we would find out all these people who were tested?
Well, the prosecutor said today that they're there if the defence wants them. That's how she put it. So unless he finds something significant among those names or among those documents, I doubt if it'll come out.
Oh, I mean, that's true. I mean, if he wants, as we've said so many times, the defence is entitled to see everything if he wants to, and that's what Ms. Barbagallo said this morning. If the names are here, if Mr. Yovich wants to go through them, he's quite welcome. Whether that gets tendered as an exhibit, well, we'll have to wait and see. Even if it was, I very much doubt that Justice Hall would see there was any public interest in the trial or in anyone else's interest for those names to become public. So they are there on a file somewhere, and I'm sure there are many hundreds of taxi drivers in Perth still driving around today that might have offered their details up voluntarily to help the police, but I'm sure they wouldn't want them out in the public arena, and I'm pretty sure Justice Hall wouldn't let that happen.
I am very curious as to whether Telstra workers were tested or how many Telstra workers gave over their DNA back then.
Oh, don't start me on that. I doubt if there were. It was all taxi drivers, and even the police came under suspicion because they talked about a car that had a logo of some kind. No mention of Telstra. We heard taxis, we heard police.
But we do know that police were making a link to Telstra. We just didn't know that publicly.
No.
So
I mean, they were certainly making inquiries, and that, as we've heard before, of cars and workers. But I mean, there's been absolutely no suggestion then or now that they went as far as swabbing Telstra workers. But I don't know.
They should have, because, I mean, you talk about the Karrakatta rape. The guards were quite specific when they mentioned Telstra or Telecom.
That's right.
And that's all we need. I mean, you see other investigations where involving children at school, they'll come out straight away and beware of a white van, beware this. I just still can't get my head around why they didn't put that out. It could have been, look for a Telstra or Telecom. It's not like you're going to defame anyone. It's, there's hundreds of employees.
That's right. I mean, we do know, though, from the evidence that we've heard so far that Bradley Edwards, through the work records and what have you, was not submitted as a driver at the time, was he?
Well, we do know that he was... no, that's right. He wasn't a driver. That wasn't his role. That wasn't his job. But... They also did have records that he had been issued a car or cars personally, and also had access to pool cars as well. So, and that was one line of inquiry that they certainly did follow up with. But as I was about to say, even on very short days, we get revelations in this case that make our ears prick up and our eyes widen. So, who knows what's to come.
Did Pathwest provide this please explain yet to the judge?
That was being firmed up, I think, today. They were going to complete that. Scott Egan, who's one of the very senior staff members at Pathwest, was apparently crossing the T's and dotting the I's on that. So that may well be tendered, by the end of the week, I would have thought, and we'll maybe make some gentle inquiries if that becomes an exhibit, whether we might see it, because personally I think that is in the public interest to know exactly how something like this can happen.
Absolutely. And also further exhibits you've heard will now be tendered as a result of these.
Another 60 something more exhibits.
Yes, some 60 odd, and we're assuming they're documents that do relate to the DNA low copy number testing on the fingernails, which is of absolute prime interest to everyone involved, and so obviously they're deemed important enough to be placed as an exhibit to add to the many dozens of exhibits that Justice Hall has already got on his desk and on his computer.
Well, as we mentioned, Carmel Barbagallo asked for another adjournment today. Do you think that court will resume tomorrow as per usual?
I think so. I think, they said 10 o'clock. What he has done is he said to the defence, look, you don't have to cross-examine in a hurry. I'll give you a few more days to get your head around this. So it's not like, although she has said she needs a couple of days, so He's given the defence, Paul Yovich, a bit of extra time that he needs if he has to assess or re-examine anything.
Yeah, if I was a betting man, and I'm not that, my wife would be happy to know. I think we'll get on back on tomorrow. I think Mr. Bogdanovich will finish his evidence in chief, and then I've got a suspicion or a feeling that Mr. Yovich will take that time over the weekend to absolutely get it all clear in his head, and then we'll start afresh on Monday. But as we know, this trial just twists and turns in many different ways, and maybe we'll get another twist tomorrow.
Well, let's see what happens. 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, you'll both be back in court, and we will be back with you for day 44 of Claremont in Conversation. We'll chat to you then.
This podcast was produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.
Enjoying this podcast? If the story behind the headline matters to you, then you can count on thewest.com.au to deliver. For more on Claremont the trial, follow the live blog, watch the nightly news updates, and sign up for daily email updates at thewest.com.au. Subscribe now for just $1 a day at thewest.com.au.